Connected Homeschooling, Episode 6.
Welcome to the Connected Homeschooling Podcast, where we connect homeschooling families like yours with leaders, authors, speakers, and all-around interesting people who provide great conversations, tips, and advice. Now here's your host, Devin Dabney.
Hello and welcome to another episode of the Connected Homeschooling Podcast. This is the show dedicated to encouraging, inspiring, and educating homeschooling families. This week, we have an interview with Jean Burk from College Prep Genius. Her company helps parents discover ways to get full scholarships or partial scholarships to send their kids to college. So if this is something that really interests you, you may want to stay tuned for the interview. We discuss her homeschooling journey and ways that you can excel on things like the PSAT or the SAT. So without further ado, here's that interview from Jean Burk. My guest today is Jean Burk. She's a writer, speaker, teacher, entrepreneur, wife, and homeschool mom. Jean, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me.
Well, it's a pleasure to have you on the show today. And I know that this is a very valuable topic for our listeners, as many of them may be homeschooling students who are in high school age or preparing for college. And this is something that many of us have a concern about. Well, if my kids are going to college, how do we pay for it? So for this podcast, I recognize the value in getting started on the right foot. And one of the ways that we can do that is with the Word of God, or with something that's inspirational and that brings our listeners encouragement. And at the beginning of each episode, I have our guest to share a scripture with the audience. And so why don't you share the scripture that you prepared today?
James 1:5, if any man lack wisdom, let him ask God, who gives generously without reproach, and it will be given to him. And that's definitely, as a homeschooling mom, you know that every day we need wisdom, every moment, every hour. And I think, he knows all things, and he just says, hey, just ask me, and I'll tell you, I'll guide you. And so that's been really important for me during the time my kids were homeschooled and of course, creating this business and from there on. So I think we should never stop asking him for wisdom. We need it, in every part of our life, every walk of our life, whether it's through the homeschooling or through our jobs or just daily life. And so hopefully that encourages your listeners today, because it definitely encourages me to know that I can come to God, and ask him.
Well, thank you so much for sharing that, and definitely that's a scripture that we should hold on to. As you mentioned, it definitely takes wisdom in every area of our lives, especially with us being homeschooling families. Now, what we do is connect our listeners to your story and really the background behind who you are, and maybe if you want to share some information about your family, just help us to get to know you a little bit better.
Well, when my son was, the whole homeschooling journey began. In fact, actually, when my son was a baby, my husband came home from a study group he was involved in, and Josh was about 6 months old, and he said, we're going to homeschool. I go, oh, great, okay, but what is that, And, it gave me a chance to, with my son being so small, it gave me a chance to really observe, my surroundings and other kids, and I began to start looking at other kids that I knew that were maybe in public or private school, and then I met some homeschoolers, and I did notice something very different, that these kids seemed to be respectful to their parents. They were obedient. They communicated very well. They were, they were disciplined. And I thought, wow, there is a difference here. And so I had several years to just do some thinking about it and looking around. And so that's what we did. And then my daughter came along, and so we, 2 years later, so we homeschooled both our kids all the way through. And, I think the greatest thing that I loved about homeschooling is the relationship that you end up having with your kids. Now my kids are 26 and 28, and, sometimes we talk a couple times a day. They both live, and one lives on the West Coast and one lives on the East Coast, and we're right in the middle of Texas. And, we do get to see them, a few times a year. And, I just love the fact that we can still talk about anything, and we can, I call, we'll talk each week, and sometimes I'll say to my son who's in law school, hey, what can I pray for you this week? What's your greatest need this week? And we still do that, just like we did back when he was in college or back when they were at home. So I love that about the homeschooling is, you have that closeness that, you're sort of forced to be close because you don't have a choice because you're home all day with them. And I love that because it does give you that intimacy and communication with them. So I love that. And kind of what happened with us as far as, my business is concerned, when my son Josh was in ninth grade, we literally had no money for college. And, as you know, homeschooling families tend to be one income. And we did want our kids to go to school, and I had a friend mention to me one day that you could get free college based on the SAT or the PSAT score. And I was very intrigued by that because I knew we had no money and we had no venue of getting any money. And so what we did with my son is we started working on the tests and practicing and really just trying to see what works and what doesn't work. And kind of a long story short, he became a National Merit Scholar. And we literally threw away 7 trash bags full of college offers. Every day my mailbox was stuffed. For probably about a year, my mailbox was full of, letters and information, things like full ride, full tuition, free room and board, free grad school money, money to study abroad. And then after my daughter got her scholarship offers in free college, my friends were wanting to know, okay, what'd y'all do? You must share with me what you did. And I thought it wasn't that big of a deal. I thought, well, we just really worked on how to take the test and realized that it wasn't a normal test. And so that's why I ended up writing the book, College Prep Genius. And then ultimately I put together a class that I've been teaching for 9 years. And now I have other teachers that teach, all across the nation. And now we're in other countries as well. So we've seen kids raise their scores as much as 600 points on the SAT and have a lot of National Merit Scholars. And even some of my kids have gone to Ivy League schools worth $230,000 or more. So it's been a huge blessing to not only get free college for us, but for to be able to help other kids do that. Not just homeschoolers. I definitely love homeschoolers, but a lot of my students are public and private school because there's a lot of people out there who don't have a lot of money and who certainly can't afford college. So. And the crazy thing is that the higher the score, the more money they give you, because what happens is colleges go up on their rankings nationally based on their test scores. So the higher the score, the more money they're going to give you because you ultimately make them look good.
Wow, and I'm sure, just as you were talking about that, with throwing away the 7 bags full of offers, that's a problem that most parents want to have. It's not something, you just go out, it's like Christmas every day.
Well, some people will take just one free offer, which is great.
Yeah. Exactly. Now you mentioned getting, your husband mentioned that he wanted to homeschool when you had children. Did you face any challenges with getting started in homeschooling?
Probably every day. I think the obstacle of just being disciplined to do it, being able to get up and do it when there's so many things pulling at you, whether it's cooking or cleaning or running errands or whatever. And so I think for me, the hardest part was just making myself, sit down and be more structured and the fact that, okay, this is what you need to do today. And so, there were so many great people to listen to. I would go to homeschool conventions and listen to people speak, and they had such great wisdom. And that really helped a lot, too, because, sometimes you're wondering, why are we not getting it or what's going on? And then you'd hear somebody else talk about their struggles, and you think, oh, maybe it's because my son's he's a boy. Maybe he should be running around playing. Maybe he shouldn't quite be doing math at 5 years old, Maybe we should tone that down. I think I expected way too much of him in the beginning, and I didn't, because I thought, okay, you need to be reading and writing and doing all this and stuff, and And I had to step back and say, wait a minute, he's just 5, he's just 6, I need to cut him some slack and realize that he's still a kid and he's still little, and a little bit of school and a lot of playing, let him get out and around and all. So, yeah, for me, it was more the discipline, just getting started, just doing it.
Now, as I've done these interviews, I've encountered that there was no one-size-fits-all process for doing the homeschool. So was there any particular curricula or methods that you integrated with your schooling?
We were probably one of those people that were more eclectic and did a variety of things, which is the beauty of homeschooling, because you can tailor the curriculum for each child. And, I'm sure I bought more stuff than I ever used, which like a lot of homeschoolers do. But one of the things that I found is that I think one of the best things to do is to find out what your children's learning styles are, because what worked for my son didn't necessarily work for my daughter. He was very, he could look at a list of spelling words and, just instantly know them, just very quickly. My daughter, we ended up going with something like spelling power because it was very kinesthetic and it really made the difference for her. And so I think that when you find that something's not working, you have to maybe take a step back and say, wait a minute, maybe it's not my child. Maybe this is not how they learn, And so sometimes nowadays they didn't have these back when my kids were little, but they have lots of people who do testing to find out, how your student individually learns via visual or audio or however. So I think that's a great place to start. I think it'll save you a lot of heartache and it'll save you a lot of money not buying things that you don't use.
Well, that's great advice. Now, with your kids and with many kids who are homeschooled, now, of course, you have adults. Many times the question that comes up is, what about socialization? Was that something that you really had to put an extra effort in on, or how do you address that when people ask about that?
Well, when a lady said, aren't you worried about socialization? I said, yes, I am. Have you seen what's out there? Absolutely. I think your kids' life speaks for themselves. The people in the beginning that would make remarks like that, you just have to sit back and be patient and not worry about it, because they're looking and they're watching, and after a period of time, when they notice that your children are well adjusted and they're respectful, people take notice, and you don't have to say anything. You don't even have to come back and say anything like "I told you so" or anything like that. You just let their life speak for themselves. And interesting enough, when my kids were growing up, and in church, for example, we were the only homeschoolers in my church. And we would have people say to us things like, wow, you have the best kids in the whole church, and I think what they were interpreting or what they were saying was, wow, your kids' mind, they're pointed to Christ, they're not out, they're not sitting up there passing notes around, they're actually, doing what they're supposed to be doing. And the interesting thing today is I still hear the same thing from people. My kids are 26 and 28, and it's so funny because when I was visiting my son in L.A., and these people come up to me and go, you know what, I don't know what you did, but I love your son. This guy is something else. I mean, he just walks in the room and goes, what can I do? Where can I serve? And I'm amazed to this day that people are still saying that. And certainly we give God all the glory, absolutely. But I think that the beauty of homeschooling was that we were able to discipline our children. We were able to, really disciple them and point them to Christ growing up. And so I think that that carried on. And we did a lot of volunteering. And so to this day, they still do a lot of volunteer work, as far as like in homeless shelters and mentoring young kids and stuff. So it's something that carried over. But, I think when you hear the what about socialization thing, you don't even really have to say anything, because you think, really, have you seen what's going on in school? Is that really what you want for your kids? And I think that's just out of ignorance that people say that, because, our kids certainly weren't left in a shell, locked in a room in a cage. They were able to, obviously they were in outside activities, be it a co-op or piano or whatever. And so they certainly had friends, lots of friends, and and we're very well adjusted. So I think that conversation is kind of dying down because people are realizing that the kind of interaction that most students are getting is very negative.
I agree. And you actually went into my next question about participation in co-ops and extracurricular activities. So let's talk a little bit more. You mentioned earlier about College Prep Genius and how that got started. Is this your first foray into the business world?
It really is. I certainly didn't expect to start off having a business. You know, my goal was for us to get scholarship money because we had no money, and we really had a desire for our kids to go to college. We knew it was important for them, you know, but it was one of those things that, you know, you didn't save for, or there wasn't really no extra money to even do that. And so when it got down to it where, wow, college is facing us, what do we do? I really feel that the Lord really put my friend in my life to just sort of throw that little blurb out there of, you know, hey, you can get free college based on this, and I'd never heard that before, and so I just took that information and said, okay, I'm going to run with this thing, you know, and it paid off big time. So, yeah, and then when it turned into a business, now I'm a speaker. You know, I've been featured on lots of TV shows, and, you know, now my program is in different countries. And so who knew but except God that was what was going to happen. So, wow. Yeah, just being able to help your own self, your own kids, you know, turn into something where you can help others, you know, which has been great.
Now, for some of our listeners, they have students who are thinking about taking the ACT or SAT. What's one of the best ways they can prepare for taking these tests?
Well, the main thing is to realize that these tests are not normal tests. This is why most students bomb it. And, you know, I've had valedictorians come to my class that have bombed the test. And, you know, kids with honor AP student 4.3s don't do well. And the main reason why most students don't do well is because this is really a logic test. And the questions are designed to trick the kids. And they're really not, you know, testing, you know, how smart the kid is. They're really testing their critical thinking skills. And so the questions are very misleading, and they're purposely designed to be very subjective. And so it's very easy to fall for the wrong answer, which happens all the time. But in reality, the test is actually objective. You know, there's really only one right answer. And what you have to understand is how the other 4 wrong answers are written. And once you can understand that, then you can decode the questions and not fall for the wrong answer. It happens all the time. Okay,
now, what's the importance of the PSAT when preparing?
Well, the PSAT, a lot of people think that the P stands for practice. It actually stands for preliminary, and the full name is PSAT/NMSQT, and this is the National Merit Scholarship Program. And what this test is also written by the College Board. So the same company who writes the SAT also writes the PSAT. The only difference is there's no essay or Algebra 2. So what it is this test is the one test that students, if they take it in their junior year, which is the only year it counts, they can end up getting amazing scholarship offers, full rides from just about anywhere. And it's based on the fact that it's the top 2% of the nation, but most students don't even practice for it. So they don't even realize it's a very important test and how they can get all this scholarship money. But it really is. And you can actually take it 3 times. You can take it in the 9th grade and the 10th grade, but, of course, the junior year is the only year it counts for scholarships. But you want to take it in the other years because that helps the student get familiar with the test. And for homeschoolers, if they use the homeschool code for their state, they can actually get the student's test booklet back in the mail. And by getting it in the mail, that gives them a chance to go over it and see what their weaknesses are, what they need to work on. And the homeschool code is based on your state. For example, Texas, the homeschool code is 994499. And the 44, those 2 numbers are the numbers what your state is alphabetically.
Oh, okay. And it just seems like it would behoove the parents to just encourage the students to take it even in 9th or 10th grade if they haven't even prepared just yet, just to be familiar with it or get the experience with it.
No, absolutely, because there's no pressure. It doesn't matter the score. And you don't want to put all your eggs in one basket and just show up on the day as a junior, hopefully, hoping that you're going to do well. You know, you want to realize that this test is learnable. You can figure it out. Students can beat this test because what happens is the College Board uses the same recurring patterns on every test, and they test the same basic set of rules and standards every time. And so you really can't study for the SAT or the PSAT. What you have to do is you have to study for the test itself and how the College Board writes the questions and how they write the answers. And so you can figure that out. You know, it costs them $625,000 just to make one test. And so they want to make sure that they're all the same. And once you understand that they're really all about the same kind of test, and you figure out how to take the test, you learn the recurring patterns, and then you practice, then you can do very, very well.
Now, in your experience in working with parents and their students, have you noticed a disadvantage or maybe an advantage for homeschoolers when it comes to taking these tests?
Not at all. Sometimes there's a disadvantage if the student hasn't actually sat down in a classroom setting with strangers, and sometimes that makes them a little nervous, and that's why I always tell them to go take the practice test. But you know what? I used to think that we homeschoolers were the least informed about these tests and the least prepared. It's really not true. You know, I teach public, private school, charter school kids as well, and unfortunately most guidance counselors today are overwhelmed and have too much on their plate, and they spend about 30 minutes a year per student changing their schedules. And so most students at even public and private schools go in very unprepared and don't get a very good score. They don't do very well. So I would say everybody's pretty much on the same equal plane because there's not really anybody out there telling them, when to take the test and how to take them, and really that they're not normal tests. That really, there is a way to prepare for them, but it's not what you think. The SAT and PSAT are not tests about what you know or how smart you are, about your IQ. Unfortunately, they're really all about how to take the test, and that's, colleges are looking for critical thinkers, and these are critical thinking tests. And so you've got to be able to look very carefully with a more critical eye and look very logically at these questions because they're not straightforward like a normal question on a normal test.
Up there, I mean, I'm sure they're probably saying right now, is it really possible that I can get free college just from a test score?
Absolutely. Not only did it happen to us, but it's helped. I teach thousands of kids a year, and I've got numerous testimonials on my website of students that's happened to them. And the reason why that's true is colleges go up on their rankings nationally, based on their test scores. And so certainly the higher the score, the more money you're going to get. And, you have to have that minimum score just to get into college. But then if you get even higher than that, you might get a partial scholarship or a half scholarship, or what we all love is a full scholarship, a full ride. And the reason why it comes down to the SAT score, and the reason why that's more important than a student's GPA, and not that I'm saying that GPA, you should have a bad one, I'm not saying that, is because a 4.0 at one high school is not the same 4.0 at another high school. Every school weighs and calculates their scores differently. Every homeschooler gives their child different curriculum and different scoring grade scale. So the only way that a college can compare one student against another student is the SAT score. It levels the playing field, and it's the same test that every student takes, so it equals everybody out. It's kind of the yardstick they use to measure. So certainly if you've got the higher scores, that says to them, okay, then you're obviously a good critical thinker, and you're probably going to be very successful in college. So that's kind of how the colleges look at it when they look at your SAT scores.
Okay. Well, you definitely shared some valuable information about these tests, and I'd encourage families to just look more into the SAT and the ways these tests are actually structured, because like you said, it's not about necessarily how smart you are, but really you have to study the structure and the methods behind the test. So what we'll do next is we'll go into a segment called 7 with Devin, and really it's just a rapid-fire type of segment, and I'll give you a question, and you give me your best answer. And
okay.
You've actually covered earlier, but if you want to just share anything else on it, that's fine.
Okay.
The first two questions are, what is the top free resource that you'd recommend to our listeners, and then the top paid resources? These just maybe a software program or a site that you'd recommend, something that would just be helpful in general for homeschoolers.
Okay. Well, when it comes to ACE and the SAT, the key is to do real test questions. And one of the best resources is the Question of the Day by the College Board. If you go to www.collegeboard.com, you can sign up for an actual test question that your students can receive every day via the Twitter or the mobile app, and those don't cost anything. And I recommend that once you do the question of the day, you want to send them to your email box and store them away, and in a few months you'll have hundreds of questions to practice with. And they're actual test questions, and those will really help. As far as the paid resource, because these tests are logic tests, I recommend adding some logic into your curriculum. From the Critical Thinking Company, that's a great place to start, or even things like the Fallacy Detective or the Thinker's Toolbox. Anything that will help your student think outside the box and become a good critical thinker.
Okay. And for our listeners who are wondering about these resources, they'll all be linked in the show notes for today's episode. So it'll be at connectedhomeschooling.com/episode 6. Now, the next question just simply asks you to take a look back in time. If you're able to start your homeschooling journey over, what would be your first step?
I think I would have been a little bit more structured. I think I was way too lax. Not that you can't be lax because it's homeschooling, but I think that I probably would have been a little bit more disciplined in some areas. It all worked out, and God is ultimately great, and by His grace we persevered and we did it. But I think for me personally, my personality is a little bit more creative, and so I tend to want to do a little bit more of the funner things versus the more the core things. So, fortunately, I was blessed to have 2 kids that were self-motivated, so that was a big help.
Okay. Well, that's great. I know some of our listeners are brand new to it, or they're just considering homeschooling. And the next question kind of goes along with that. What's your best advice for new homeschooling moms? Because some of our listeners are just considering it, or maybe this is their first semester or first week of homeschooling. So what is your advice for them?
My advice is that it is worth it. You know what? Don't look at how overwhelming it could be or what subjects you don't know. Look at the big picture. In the end, it is better to have a child who is pointed to Christ and who is a blessing to society over having some academically smart, amazing student that you send to some school that you think is going to possibly do that. If their heart is right, then the academics are going to come. You don't have to worry about that part so much. So concentrate more on their heart and let the academics be second.
Well, that's great. Now, the next 2 questions are, and you've kind of gone on this earlier in the interview, what has been the greatest reward, and then what has been the greatest challenge in your time as a homeschooling mom?
Definitely the greatest reward is the relationship. Like you said, I said already, knowing that your kids can call you and talk to you about anything, and you can talk to them about anything, and they ultimately become your best friends. You want to raise kids that you want to have a relationship with as an adult, and so if you keep that in mind, that one day we're going to be friends. We're not necessarily friends right now. I'm the parent, you're the child, and that's the relationship. But you keep it in mind that as an adult, would I want to spend time with you? I had a lady tell me the other day that her daughter, who's the age of my daughter, said, I love my daughter, but I do not like her. I do not want to be around her because she's out of control. And I was very saddened by that, and I pointed it to the Lord and how He's gracious and how He can redeem. And I think that keep the big picture in mind, about the end result. And as far as my greatest challenge was pretty much, I think that for us it was more of, I think for today, let me give you the greatest challenge for today for most students, I think is the technology today. It was just kind of starting with us a little bit back then. I think you need to trust your kids, but don't give them, you need to give your kids responsibility, but don't trust them. And that means that, when it comes to the internet and when it comes to phone and all the things that are going on now, we were just kind of starting to see some things. We didn't allow our kids to do any chatting with people they didn't know. But one of the things that we didn't realize is that the internet was such a wild, wild west. And you have to realize that, you may trust your kids on the internet, but don't trust their flesh, because their flesh will lie to them. And you need to have filters. You need to know everything that they're doing, because their flesh will lie to them. And even though they're great kids and they love the Lord, there's so many enticing things out there that you need to be on your guard. And for us, the challenge was just starting, and we were blessed that the internet and the things that my kids didn't have a phone, certainly, until they got into college, and then my daughter when she started driving, and that was just used to call us. But I think that the technology today does not make our kids smarter. It actually dumbs them down. Bill Gates and Steve Jobs didn't have an iPhone or a computer. You know what I mean? And their brilliance came out because they were thinkers and they worked on projects. And so I just want to encourage the parents out there today that, there's just so many horrible things out there that are in technology that you need to be aware, and don't, and your children may be doing some things that you don't want them to be doing, and you need to be monitoring everything, because you are the parent. I disagree with these parents who say their children, well, they're teenagers, they need their privacy. No, they don't. It's your home. Nothing should be private in your home. Nothing should be taboo and nothing to talk about, and nothing should be private when it comes to your children.
Great advice. Now, the last question in this segment is something that we'd end on a light note. What is a unique talent or characteristic about you that most people may not know?
A unique characteristic about me that people don't know. I love parties. I am a huge party giver, and we have created a lot of unique parties over the years for my kids. And I've got a lot of. I also want to write a book over it because I have so many ideas. But it's just I love doing it. When my kids hit the teenage years, I wanted to do something really fun and unique for them. McDonald's and all that was great when they were little, but then it doesn't cut it when they become a teenager. And there was really nothing out there except for Truth or Dare or Spin the Bottle. And I said, no way, And so we invented a lot of very unique, fun parties. And that carried over. My kids are still enjoying doing that when, now that they're on their own. And I love to do it with adults. So, I had a 70s disco party recently. My next party is going to be a couples party. I've done mystery parties, and I've done a lot of things. So, yeah, that really is if I could do something every day, it'd probably be plan parties. So.
Wow. That's very interesting, and definitely something that I did not know. Well, what we are going to do to close out the interview here is we're going to offer a resource that's very valuable for our listeners, and I'll let you share about that, and then also just share with the listeners the best way to contact you if they want to find out more about what you do and what you have to offer.
Oh, great. Well, we have an ebook called 15 Secrets to Free College. It's normally $9.95 on my website, but you can get it for a penny if you use my code. Now, the reason why that's a penny is because PayPal wouldn't let us do it for free, so I had to put some kind of money amount in there. If you go to www.collegeprepgenius.com and click on where it says ebook 15 Secrets and put in your information, and if you use the code CONNECTED, 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 then you can get that for a penny. The best way to get a hold of me, you can certainly email us at info, at collegeprepgenius.com. My office number is 817-282-7737. And we have a lot of testimonials and a lot of good information on my website about, how to ace the SAT and how to get free college. And really, it ultimately comes down just to how to take the test. And once students can learn that, then, they can figure this test out, certainly get the high scores and get good scholarship money.
Well, Jean, it's been a pleasure having you on the Connected Homeschooler podcast today, and I know that this is going to be a blessing and an encouragement for many families as they listen in. So thank you so much for joining.
Thanks, Devin. All right, bye-bye.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, I hope you enjoyed the interview with Jean Burk from College Prep Genius. If you'd like to take advantage of the offer that she mentioned for our resource of the week, feel free to visit her site and use the promo code CONNECTED. You'll be able to get that ebook for 1 penny. If you're interested in learning about a homeschool curriculum that you can use for all of your children for absolutely free, you'll want to tune in next week when we talk to Lee Giles from the Easy Peasy All-in-One Homeschool. If you haven't connected with us on Facebook, Twitter, Google+, or YouTube yet, feel free to do so and pass on the word to others so they can get some of the value that you receive each week. Tune in next week for another encouraging, inspiring, and educational episode where we'll connect you with the people, the resources, and the tools that you need to make your homeschool a success. God bless you.